volunteers, and I promise it is an easy job. You don't even have to say anything. You just have to stand there. So, I need 2 volunteers, please. Thank you, Madeline. Come on up. If you would, front and center would be great. I'll give you that name tag if you want to slip that around your head. Good job. And I need a volunteer in the back. Somebody be willing to, okay. Thank you, Mr. Cordova. You'll put that on, that'd be great, and stand up on the platform up there, that'd be great. Thank you. Alright, so, we're going to start with Madeline. If you would, hold on to that.
I chose the color of the string.
So, keep holding to that. Now, Mr. Long, would you just hold that right there? No, just hold the string right there. Thank you. And we're going to head over this way. Let's see, Mr. Horn. Would you please hold that? Right there. Thank you. I'll go underneath it. Thank you. Got to figure out how to do this better.
Okay.
I'll try this side. And I'm just going to let the screen there. Let's see, where else should we go? Who wants to be next? Neil, there you go. Thank you. And now I think we can end back at over there. Mr. Cordova. Oh yeah, sure, why not? Oh, who's our lucky one? Who should we do? Just hold that. Yeah, that's fine. Okay, perfect. And I gotta go underneath. And Mr. Cordova, all the way over here. Thank you for continuing to hold your strings. You get to hold the spool right there. Okay. Excellent. This is beautiful. I love it. So, what did we just do?
Connected each other.
We connected each other. We did what? We went from point A to point B. That's right.
Oh, wow.
Now hold on, we all know something about point A and point B, don't we? The shortest distance between point A and B is a straight line. That's right. Did we do a straight line? No, we did not. Keep holding. Keep holding. Keep holding, Mr. Cordova. You can let go. You can let go. No, I'm sorry. We forgot about the chairs. There we go. There we go. There we go. Thank you. Perfect. You can let go. Perfect. Thank you. And you can let go too. Oh, sorry. Angela. Thank you. So, now how do we do this?
I want to be.
Okay. How many times do you think we went from point A to point B just to get all around the room? At least 3, 4, 5? Yeah, we've got a big pile of string. You can just drop your string. That's okay, you can drop your string. Thank you. Thank you. We're just going to pile all this up in the back. We're not going to measure it because it was a lot of point A's to point B's. Now, we all know that sometimes we're on a trajectory, we're on a plan, on a path to go from point A to point B. But then what happens? We go here, and oh, I got to do this. We go here, and oh wait, I'm thinking about that, and I'm going there. And what do we call those things? Distractions. Yes, things that pull us this way. Things that make us think about that. Things that take us off this path. Things that make us go over there, and all of a sudden, point A to point B takes forever. Research has recently said that when we get distracted from a task we're working on, it on average takes us over 20 minutes to refocus and get fully back into what we were working on. 20 minutes. Recent research has said that kids in school are distracted for at least a quarter of their school day. And we all know that our attention spans are extraordinarily short. even shorter. When we're searching online, our attention spans are down to 8 seconds. We are such impatient, distracted people. But of course, this is not just about being efficient, and it's not just about being diligent and responsible and focused. Surely, God cares about our attention. God cares about the places we put our minds. God cares about what we pay attention to. So many times in the Bible, so many times there are moments when God addresses or talks about or has an event that seems to cover issues of distraction. When people have their minds in different places, when people are doing different things, when people have one direction in mind but then go another. And so often, so many events and stories in the Bible have to do with people getting distracted. In fact, it could be argued that every story in the Bible is a story of distraction. Of people like us getting distracted and God pulling them back on the track. It's like the plot of almost every story. So what we're going to try to do is we're going to try to address at least these 2 questions about distraction. What distractions should we most watch for, and why does God care about distractions? We'll do our best to answer those 2 questions. But those are big questions, and for big questions we need big stories. And big stories are Sunday school stories. I love these Sunday school stories because they are the kinds of stories that are big enough and strong enough to help us form that bedrock of faith. That's why we're going back to a lot of these stories. These are some of the biggest, most important, most foundational stories that we can grab onto and learn about God, learn about ourselves, learn about how a relationship with God works. And so we're walking through these. 4 of them in Genesis, 8 of them in Matthew. It's kind of like the Genesis of the Old Testament and the Genesis of the New Testament. We're looking at the beginnings of both to figure out what is God, how do we get to know God better, and what does it look like to be in a relationship with God, the groundwork of all this. So, last week we started with the story of creation, perhaps the biggest story of all. And we're jumping a little bit later to another story in Genesis, and a lot has happened between creation and where we're going today. So much has happened that I think it would be really helpful to graph what has happened. Because graphs are fun and they help us visualize things. So we're going to graph the level of distraction that these different episodes show us that people were dealing with. So our y-axis, or vertical axis, is level of distraction. Low distraction to high distraction. Our horizontal axis, obviously, is the episodes in order in the first few chapters of the book of Genesis. So if we graph the level of distraction, it might look something like this. It sort of looks like our EKG, or our heart rate throughout the day. But just think about this. In the beginning, when God created everything, it was all fresh, it was all good, it was all new, and it was how it's supposed to be. And so there was low distraction. And then there was the serpent, and Eve, and Adam, and the apple, and then everything was a mess. And we had super high distraction. Things were not going like it was planned. Then God banishes them from the garden. Things are starting to get better, low distraction again. Then we have Cain and Abel. For whatever reason, the sacrifice that was offered was not what God wanted. We don't really know all the story of that. Cain takes revenge on Abel, and it's a horrible mess that's created, and God puts a curse on Cain. High distraction results. Soon after, the people start having families and spreading around like God wants them to. The distraction is lower. And we have this weird episode, this disturbing episode in chapter 6 in Genesis, if we read it this week, that wickedness is across the land. We don't know all the details, but it's just bad. God said it's worse than I ever imagined. And then, so high level of distraction. Then we get into Noah. God brings Noah on the scene. God God restores the world through the flood. We finally get this restoration, this new creation, so low level of distraction. And then after Noah, we get into the story that we're in now. So you can see this up and down, this high distraction, low distraction. It constantly bounces back and forth. Interesting thing. What happens, what tends to happen, when there's a low level of distraction in terms of people's faithfulness? And what happens when there's a high level of distraction in terms of people's faithfulness? There's this opposite relationship. So it might look something like this. We're having fun with the graphs today. When there's low distraction, there seems to be high faithfulness because we're not distracted. But then when there's high distraction, it's just a disaster for people's faithfulness in trying to follow after a relationship with God. So we see this correspondence between our distractions and our ability to walk with God and be faithful to God. Notice where we end these episodes. Low distraction, fairly high faithfulness. Because people are spreading across the nations. It's as God designed it to be. Families are blossoming. Creation is expanding. So based on our graph, can we guess what might happen next? Yes, we can. So we're going to enter into the story of the Tower of Babel. It starts off really well. It's a thumbs up moment. Some really good things are happening. So I'd like you to take your thumb, because we're starting off thumbs up. So let's get a thumbs up. You got to hold it there as we read. And when you see the story start to turn, then I want you to dip that thumb. So we're not really watching each other, it's okay, but just as you see the story turn, dip that thumb when you feel, this is a thumbs down episode. So here we go. At one time, the whole earth spoke the same language. It so happened that as they moved out to the east, they came upon a plain in the land of Shinar and settled down. They said to one another, "Come, let's make bricks and fire them well." They used bricks for stone and tar for mortar. Then they said, "Come, let's build ourselves a city and a tower that reaches heaven. Let's make ourselves famous so we won't be scattered here and there across the earth." Thumbs down, that's right. It seems to go gradually. Because at the beginning, they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're spreading out to the east. They're spreading out from where they were. That's what God wanted them to do. That's not a bad thing. They were all speaking the same language. That's okay. It's hard to communicate when you don't speak the same language, so they had to be able to get things done. There were some things that were happening that were good things. But, of course, then things start to turn south. That's when we find the problems that arise. And we start to see what they got distracted by. They got distracted because they wanted to build a tower to heaven and because they wanted to be famous. When it says they were building this tower to heaven, it wasn't just that they were building a tall tower. It's that they wanted to build a tower to heaven. That's like an idiom for them saying, we want to be as tall as God. We want to have the highest building. We want to have the highest reach. We want to have the highest view. We can be just like God can be. So we're going to build something that shows that we're just as good as God is. And then that other line, they wanted to be famous. They wanted to make a name for themselves, some versions say. They wanted to be the recognized ones. They wanted all the other places around them to say, "Oh, look at them. We want to be like them. We know who they are. They're the big people. We want to be like them." This might signal the most dangerous that we can possibly fall into. The distraction of, "Oh, I can do that. Oh, I can become that. Oh, look at who notices me." It's the distraction of me. Perhaps the biggest distraction that we can face is the destruction of me. If we flipped a long way ahead in the Bible, there's a great verse that points to this in Philippians. Don't be selfish. Don't try to impress others. Be humble, thinking of others as better than yourselves. Don't look out only for your own interests, but take an interest in others. One of the reasons I love this perspective is because it doesn't just say, don't pay attention to yourself, shun yourself, you're not important. It is both valuing us as God's creation and valuing everybody else as God's creation. It's saying don't pay attention only to yourself. Because we do, we have responsibilities for ourselves. We have roles, we have jobs that God gives us. We have things that we must do as responsible followers of Jesus. But that's not it. If we only pay attention to me, then we're ignoring the rest of God's creation. We're not valuing the rest of all that God has done and all that God has made. The distraction of me can so get in the way of what God has planned for us. After all, we literally just looked at the story of creation. And if God made you and me and the world and everybody else in God's image, then how can we possibly just look at me as if I'm the only one that matters? God made all this and all these people and everybody. And we're valuable parts of God's creation. The distraction of me might be the most dangerous and would tear us away from what God has in store for us. So what does God do with all this? And why does God care about distractions? That's where the second half of the story makes us ask some big questions. So here's the rest of the story. God came down to look over the city and the tower those people had built. God took one look and said, one people, one language. Why, this is only a first step. No telling what they'll come up with next. They'll stop at nothing. Come, we'll go down and garble their speech so they won't understand each other. Then God scattered them from there all over the world. And they had to quit building the city. That's how it came to be called Babel. Because there, God turned their language into Babel. From there, God scattered them all over the world. Now let's look at what God was not happy with. There was the language. Was God not happy that they spoke the same language? In some sense, we could sort of say yes, because God garbles their language. But was it a bad thing? Is it a sinful thing? Is it a wrong thing, a disobedient thing, to speak the same language? Well, probably not. I mean, they had to speak the same language to get things done, to be able to be a community, to be able to communicate and understand each other. So it's not bad that they spoke the same language necessarily. Was it bad that they were a people? Where God says, one language, one people, one language. Was it bad that they were a people? I mean, God created God's people. God formed and called God's people to be a people after God's own heart, to be a people who follow God and represent God to the nations. So you could say, it's not bad to be a people, a community, a together group who are seeking and trying to follow God. How about the tower? Was the tower bad? We can take a vote, I suppose, but let's not take a vote. Was the tower bad? In some sense, we could say yes, because it was built to reach heaven. It was a signal and a sign that the people wanted to be great and to be big, to be as big as God. But does the tower get destroyed at the end of the story? That's not what gets God's attention. That's not what happens as a result of the story. For all we know, the tower stayed for a long time. We don't know anything about what happened to the tower. We do know what God does. God marvels their speech, and twice God does something. God scatters the people. Now that sounds like a punishment, doesn't it? I'm going to scatter the people. I'm going to get them out of here. But is that really a punishment? I mean, what did God say back in the beginning to Adam and to Eve after they were created? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. What happened after God flooded the world and creation started over? What did he say to Noah and family? Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. God wants them to go out and fill the earth. God wants us to go out and fill the earth and fill it with the light of Jesus. It's not bad to fill the earth. And so God is scattering them. Why? Because that's God's plan. God's getting them back on track, putting them back in the center of God's plan. Because distractions divert us from God's best plan for us. I love that psalm. We quote it all the time. Actually, I think it was in the prayer confession. That psalm about God has the best pathways, guides us on the best pathways for our lives. Their best pathway was to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth. Our best pathway is probably a lot of things, but our best pathway, we could say, all of us, is to love God and to love others. And Jesus said, the greatest commandment, love God and love others. That's our best pathway. And then there are other pathways that are best pathways that God gives each of us. The ways God calls you and me to be able to represent Jesus where we are. The pathways that God puts us on to be able to influence others. The pathways that God puts us on to be able to sustain our faith. All kinds of pathways and ways that God leads us to be on. God's hope is that we don't divert from those because we get distracted by things. So this brings up a few questions. A few things to maybe ponder, a few things to perhaps talk about, a few things to perhaps step into, but a few things. First one, how am I most often distracted by me? I figure we can all answer that because we're all the most qualified to be able to answer that question. How am I most often distracted by me? In other words, where do I pay unhealthy attention to me? Where do I pay too much attention to me where it gets in the way, where it distracts me? Second question, how would I describe God's mission or calling for my life right now? If somebody came up to you later today and said, tell me, what's your mission in life? How would you say it in a sentence? What is God's mission or calling for my life right now? Of course, we all have the big mission and calling, but what's the unique one? And what's the unique language that each of us would use to be able to describe God's mission and calling for each of our lives right now, today? May God's power remove distractions from our lives so we can be on the best pathway that God has in store for us. Let's pray.